Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today as we discuss and look at reflecting on what was to act on what's ahead. My name is Mandy. I am the facilitator for Slido, which is where we go to answer questions, ask questions, and answer the polls. So before we get started, just wanted to show you how to get to Slido so that you can participate. If you have your phone handy, you can open the camera on your phone and just point it at the QR code, and it should prompt you to join us on Slido. You can also open a web browser, go directly to slido.com and enter the code that you see on the screen. This week it's reflect. And once in Slido, you have a few features that we get to interact with. First is our polls. We'll ask a couple of polls during the session and you can answer those there. And also the Q&A session to submit your questions so that during our session at the end of the webinar, we can go ahead and answer those. And if you use the burger, the 3-line icon at the top left of the screen, you'll also be able to access some of the resources that you'll learn about. Our host today is Dr. Janet Pilcher.
Thank you, Mandy. Appreciate the explanation of how to use the tool. And welcome, everybody. I'm Janet Pilcher. I lead student education and have the pleasure and honor of working with partners and leaders and individuals across the country as we think about how we lead organizations to achieve excellence. So just great to have you all with us today, and hope some of you continue to come back each week, and we sure appreciate the attention that you provide to us here, and hope that the resources that we provide after the sessions are helpful to you. And for those of you who are new to us for the first time, welcome. Hope that you'll continue to visit with us and learn with us each week. So wanted to, the session today is really, it's about reflection. And we've spent quite a bit of time on our team, I think, continuing to reflect over the past several months and trying to learn from that. And last week, I talked a little bit about, how sometimes through disruption, we have to unlearn something to relearn something. And so as we think about ways that we move through that disruption to take action and based on the changes that occur, reflective practice becomes really significant in that process. So today I'm gonna touch on a couple of topics, a little bit about human moments. I think we're all longing for some human connection and some of those human moments. And then specifically about reflective practice, and then very specifically about a tool that we're using to engage people that we work with in the reflective practice with reentry. And then, as Mandy talked about, we'll end today with Q&A, your questions answered, or any comments or thoughts that you have for us. So as usual, let's start today with a poll. And just think through this question for a few minutes and then answer it in a way that you feel best. To what extent do you believe your organization is prepared to address people's emotional well-being as we continue with the current challenges? So how does your organization focusing on people's well-being? Not at all, or extremely prepared in doing so. So let's look at where we are in the poll as the responses come in. So right now we're kind of trending at about that 6.0, kind of midway, maybe, some people quite well at the 8 area, 6.1 as an average. So, somewhere in the middle with some of you really, I think, maybe paying great attention to individual and people's emotional well-being. So yes, they continue to come in. So let's talk about that a little bit more. So I found interesting as I was looking at resources. I came across a Harvard Business Review article called The Human Moment at Work, and it was written almost 20 years ago, a little over 20 years ago. And I this there multiple things really touched me in that in that article, even as old as it was. But some of it's really relevant right now, and it's really focusing on, I think we're really missing some of those human moments. I know I am, and I have an opportunity to be with my South Louisiana colleagues, South Louisiana community colleagues next Monday and Tuesday with the executive team. I'm just thrilled about that and can't wait for that opportunity. But we have to be really cautious and careful and mindful of how we do that. But this is a quote that came from that article, and it says, "But as the number of human moments decreases, the number of little misunderstandings is likely to increase. They compound one on another until there is nothing little about them anymore. People begin to wonder if they can trust their organization, and just as often, they begin to question their own motives, performance, and self-worth." And, maybe this was more self-reflection for me. But as we continue to move on and really face the challenges, I think that if we're not cautious and not really, really, really mindful, that it's easy to get caught up in misunderstandings. And I've had to really watch myself in especially the last week or two, jump to conclusions quicker than I normally would, because I don't have that opportunity to make those human connections. And so I may make some wrong assertions about what I'm thinking. And I just don't have that opportunity to do it in a way that's you know, been been the human connection of really understanding where people are coming from time to time. So we tend to reach out with quick responses with email or in Teams and our platforms. Uh, but that's somewhat not the same, and I'm really realizing it more than ever that it's not the same, and that I can make some wrong decisions by jumping to those conclusions. And that's been my reflection. So, I don't know if you feel that way, or if you've seen people or been part of the process where you feel that way. And I think we have to be careful, and we're not coming to the end of communicating in the way we are now. We're still going to be working in this virtual environment in some way. So how do we kind of manage that? And I don't know about you, but at times I feel I've been find myself saying I'm just zoomed out. Um, and there was something in the article that I thought was very descriptive of sometimes how we feel. And here he was talking about a person, and she felt as if she had run a marathon through the desert. No wonder her body ached, her mind was numb, staying on screen, online, and on the telephone for extended periods. The brain becomes starved for fuel, rest, and human contact. And sometimes I do think that we're really starving for that human contact. So, how do we then manage that? And so it's through reflection. And even though we're in different types of work environments, it's through reflection, I believe, that I've seen people and seen the outcomes of using reflection, to manage that and to feel like you have more human contact with that pause and reflection and deeper connection. So I go back to the work of Bell Hooks. She wrote a great book called Teaching to Transgress. And I used it when I was teaching as a faculty member at the university. And there's one thing that I pull out when I really need time for thinking through things and doing deep reflection. I tend to go to this statement, and I hope it's helpful to you as we really begin to transfer this to reflection. And here's from Bell Hooks. Let me begin by saying that I came to theory because I was hurting. The pain within me was so intense that I could not go on living. I came to theory desperate, wanting to comprehend, to grasp what was happening around and within me. Most importantly, I wanted to make the hurt go away. I saw in theory then a location for healing. And I think in this time, um, we are continuously trying to heal ourselves and heal other people, and build our spirits in a way that we can reach out to people so that we continue to keep them connected to us. And so that's just been my self-reflection on how to ground myself in thinking, and to practice and to act is really using that reflective practice. And the reflective practice is healing. And so I'm going to go back to probably some of our one of my favorites in education. For those of you that have been in education, I know the work that you've probably connected to the work of John Dewey. And so John Dewey says to us, he teaches us, we do not learn from experience, we learn from reflecting on experience. Being reflective enables us to direct our actions with foresight. It enables us to know what we are about when we act. And that is where we are, to me, right now, is as we begin to transition from one place to another and we're going into a new year, how are we going to act, and how do we make sure that our deeper reflections are represented in our actions in a way that we help people and support people to do the things that help us get to the outcomes that are most significant, and supporting each other, and in education, supporting our students and family. And so what does that mean? It means to me being good to ourselves by taking time to ask questions. And so reflective practice is about asking questions. It's more as important as we listen to others, and listening to others means we hear the answers. And so as we're working with partners and working with our own team and working with each other, we're beginning to think about continuous ways of asking questions, having opportunities to listen and really hear what people are saying, so that when we move something to action, that it's representative of where we are as an organization, so we can move forward in the most positive and critical way. And so very specifically, there are three aspects of taking on these reflections. First of all, looking back, thinking about why we did what we did, where it worked and where it didn't work, analyzing and learning, considering why things are the way they are, what we can learn from them, how we can improve, and then looking forward, how things might be, how we take what we've learned and become better. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about each of those and look at some probing questions that you can take with you to ask your teams as you move forward. And so as we think about reflective practice on our team, and as we work with partners, we've spent a considerable amount of time developing a toolkit that really is about helping leaders and teams ask reflective questions of each other, so that we can move to the right action, and so that we're doing the right things for the right reasons for the people that we serve. And so I mentioned this last week, and we have a toolkit that you all, as part of the webinars, will receive. And the parts of the toolkit really have probing questions that you can use for the main purpose of connecting with your teams to ask questions and to listen to answers and hear what people are saying. And then my colleague, KK Owen, last week in June into July, are going to hold roundtables so that we as colleagues can listen to each other and hear what people are saying and learn from each other. So we're really excited about having this opportunity to build that reflective practice. So as we think about reflective practice, then answer this question. As I've spent quite a bit of time in the last 10 minutes talking about reflective practice, how well has your organization reflected on what you've learned since around March 15th? So if you would, take a minute and answer that question. Okay, so we have, round 7.2. So, the majority of the people in the 8 range. So a little bit of a spread from our audience, but for the most part, that that people that we think as educators, I think we do, and as people who are leaders in the field, any field, we think it's important to practice reflective practice. So let me just talk a little bit about some specifics that you can take with you. And these questions are in the toolkit, so you'll have access to them. You'll also have access to the slides. I'm going to take you just looking back those three areas that I talked about a few minutes ago. When we're looking back, we may ask questions like this. When we responded to a COVID situation, what assumptions did we make, right or wrong? I've asked that question a number of times to leaders and teams that I work with, and there are some interesting answers about the types of assumptions that we made. When we responded to a COVID situation, what did we set out to achieve? When we responded, what key actions did we take? And when we responded, what were the key challenges we faced? So the first thing is looking back at what we did and really reflecting on what we did and how we would answer those questions. Then we move to analyzing and learning questions. So looking back on our key list of actions above, then we just talk about what worked well and how do we know? And that's the best part of this question. How do we know what worked well? What didn't work well? And how do we know? Knowing what we know now, what might we have done differently? How have we grown and changed from what we did? What have we learned? And what advice would you have given yourself based on what you've learned? If we had it to do differently, what advice would we give ourselves and what we would do? And the last thing is, now that we've processed and reflected, again, we're asking these questions and probing to these, we're listening and we're hearing people, and very much we're not as interested in what we have to say, but we're most interested in what the people around us have to say so that we can learn, reflect, and now look forward. As we think of the start, if you're in school, of the next school year, what new challenges and opportunities will we face? And gosh, even if we name them today, they're probably going to change tomorrow or down a month down the road. Look back on our list of actions from step one. What worked well, and what do we think will continue to serve us well? What things will we need to do? What are the things that we're doing now that we can stop doing? Extremely important question. Just because we've done the things that we've had to do all along, maybe there are things we're going to need to stop doing so we can do other things that are going to be demanding of us or demanded of us. And the bottom line is, as leaders and as teams of people working in the organization, what's your vision? What's our vision? What do we want to be when we get through this? And very specifically, how can we be better for it on the other side? Yeah, so I'll conclude today by this is I could easily just say, here's some questions to ask about, ask these questions, see how it works for you. But I'm living this with our team, and also living this with people that I work with in the field. And I just had an opportunity last Friday to be with the Michigan State University Infrastructure Planning and Facilities Executive Team. And we started at 8:30 and we ended around 1:30, 1:45. So we spent that day on Zoom, but had a lot of breaks and tried to manage that human connection as much as possible. But I went back to that human connection, and we all went back to that human connection and used these types of questions to really listen and hear each other and build that connection back so that we understood as a group at Michigan State what's important to us and what do we need to do to work as a team to move forward. And what Michigan State IPF wants to do is provide excellent service with the highest level of safety and care and concern for each other. And they're doing that. And the answers that they provided to those questions that day really were powerful and empowered them as leaders to gain back that energy as they work with their teams. And that's what we're trying to do, is to really gain back energy and to use reflection even through these virtual times to build back that human connection. And I just love this picture because this is the Sparty statue at Michigan State. And this is landscape services. And it just shows the reflection of how important it is for people in our organizations to do the right thing for all the right reasons. so that we can get back to a place where we're serving, for us in education, students and their families and our communities in a way that's most meaningful. I appreciate the time today, and I hope that when you walk away that you really think through reflective practice as a way and a tool to build the human connection, even when we're in this virtual environment, and that you will probe with questions, listen intently, and hear what people are saying so that we can move to the right action. So be glad to take questions, comments that you have. There's the Q&A code here, and would really love your thoughts and questions related to today's topic and reflective practice. So take a minute and add a question. So here's a question. Do you recommend a balance of how much time we spend looking back and reflecting versus planning forward? It's a great question. You know, probably our tendency is, man, we don't have enough time to look back. We got to get we got to get with it and look forward and we got to get what we need to do done so we can move forward. I think for you all, you have to figure out how to balance that. What I learned last Friday and what I've learned with when I've had the conversation is my tendency in building that agenda was to shortchange the reflection of looking back. But I didn't allow myself to do that when I was building the agenda for groups, because what I've found is that if we take just a little bit more time than maybe we would like to allocate to looking back, that we'll do better things, and we can do it quicker possibly when we're making those decisions about looking forward. When we got to the point last week about what actions needed to be taken in order to move forward, at the end of that day, it was just like clockwork in terms of what people said that they knew that they needed to do around that table. And I believe it was the backwards look, the looking back, that helped us get there faster. How can we demonstrate the intent listening in a virtual environment? You know, I think more than anything, first of all, I think the virtual environment kind of demands for us to pay attention, you know, to look at each other and to not be multitasking. I would ask that we don't do that when we're listening. And I've found that if it's helpful to you, that when we have a question that we're asking, when we're listening intently, that we ask additional questions. We just keep probing until we really have an understanding, and we help that person dive deeper into that reflection. And by doing that, we're building those relationships in a meaningful way, because we're really wanting to know and we're interested in what somebody is telling us, and how we want to listen in a very meaningful way. Do we need to explain actions based on reflection or conversation with others? So when we, I think if I'm hearing that right, if when we make a decision to act, to build actions, the conversation around that action helps us explain the why to our communication. And I know sometimes we get tired of, you know, start with the why, and people are like, start with the why. But the why, starting with the why, is not as much about your why in communicating why we're doing something. It's as much about about using what we've heard from people who are telling us and helping us and guiding us on the action, and being able to connect back to that discussion to define and describe what those actions are. So there's sometimes when we build communication and we say, you know, start with the why and then talk about the what and the how. I just want to kind of reinforce what I just said a few minutes ago. It wouldn't be about my why. It's about the why related to what I've learned from what's important to people, and how we communicate that back in a way that's most meaningful. And when we're taking those actions in that way, then people are going to want to come with us, because they're going to understand what they need to do in order to move forward. Let's see, how do you make reflection more intentional and habitual on your team? You know, this is probably a great question for me, because I would say that so as a leader, as a leader, my tendency is to move to act. I'm pretty quick with wanting to move to action. I'm very results oriented and want to move us to get to that place pretty quickly. And so when we ask, how do you make reflection more intentional and habitual on your team? Some of you may have more innate ways of doing that. For someone like me who's driving to results, or maybe feels a pressure point in order to get to those results, or some urgency, I have to really put it into a process in many ways. So, or to really build that into the agenda and make sure that I put in the intentional types of questions that we'll ask, so that we're building that reflection in. What I will, what and again, I think maybe I'm just needing that human connection and human touch more as a leader, than I have, which is why I'm probably relating some of these questions back to me personally and what that means for me as a leader. Um, as I think through where we are right now, I know every day that I have to do a better job at asking more questions than having the answers, because we don't all have the answers. And my ability to help people stop and reflect and to ask those questions in particular ways that are meaningful becomes significant. What I've also learned is by doing that, I'm getting better at it. And hopefully that will eventually become more of a habit of practice for me as a leader, and a changed and learned skill and behavior, that I've probably as a leader needed to learn most of my life. So this has been good for me, to be able, and I hope it is for you, to really stop and think about, how do we gather more information? How do we probe in ways that's meaningful? And how do we help people? How do we pull things out of people so that we're learning from people in order to solve problems and build solutions that are meaningful? It's very difficult to do, but it's also something I think that will change us forever. Last question here. How do you manage the varying interpretations of outcomes that come from reflecting as a team? If I go back to, the first part is, and again, I'm good. Yeah, it's more, I'm saying this not to say that it's easy, but as we listen to people, sometimes we tend to want to move to judgment, and we want to judge this as, this is a good idea, not a good idea, let's move it. And so as I think back over the sessions that I've facilitated, that the hours that we spent just on allowing people to have conversations and not put judgment on those at first, really, I think, helps us move to more of a positive place with our teams. So at some point, it's like almost like a research study, as we're gathering information. If we gather enough information, what I find is that we're going to find commonalities, and so will our team members find commonalities in the conversations that we have, so that we're not having to judge one or two things, but we're kind of coming to some type of conclusion based on the multiple sources of information that people are providing us. And in some of those sessions, it's not just who wants to talk. In some of those sessions, it really is around the room. If it's a smaller team, it's around the room. Like, we want to hear from you in terms of what this experience was like for you, what worked for you, what didn't work for you. And then we begin to look at the commonalities or the variations from that, and all move together with some type of action. So the last, I think, really last question, new to this, how can I access the resources you shared? If you're here today for the first time, you'll receive a follow-up email from us that will have the slide deck, and it'll have multiple resources that you can connect to. It'll have access to the toolkit that will have all these questions. And appreciate the question there. Our job and our role is to use these webinars to think, for all of us to think a little bit differently, to think beyond maybe what we're doing right now, and to provide resources that may be helpful to you. Sure appreciate the time that I've spent with you all today. I hope this was meaningful to you, and look forward to connecting with you again. Thank you all.